Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is July 21, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Mark, Paul, and Clinton, three of the smartest people in the world. And boy, am I lucky to be able to be enlightened today. And in fact, today is Marshall McLuhan's birthday. He would be 112 years young today, but the dude forgot to die. We know that. So we'll just start off, since we named this salon New Forms of Science Fiction, as McLuhan Salon, with a quote from Marshall's book of letters. This was in the 50s. He wrote to his mom. The Mechanical Bride is really a new form of science fiction with ads and comics cast as characters. Since my object is to show the community in action rather than prove anything, it can indeed be regarded as a new kind of novel. Well, that's an interesting probe by Marshall to say at that age. And we'll just go round robin, and we'll start with you, Clinton. Thank you for all your research and everything you do. Wasn't Marshall just anthropomorphizing, in a way, ads and comics, calling them characters? That's part one to the question. And we'll go round robin. And then part two is people can address, what does this word new mean? A new kind of novel. So first of all, Clinton, is he anthropomorphizing ads and comics as characters? What's going on there? In the entire quote, you can dive into as you will.
Right. Well, when you read The Mechanical Bride, first of all, happy birthday, Marshall McLuhan. When you read Marshall McLuhan's first book, The Mechanical Bride, all of the consumer objects that he's analyzing, especially cars, he sees how cars are being sold to young men as sex objects with billowy tires and smooth curves and luscious cradle-like seats that are wombs, right? Or girdles are sold to women to give them exactly the right form, mechanizing their shape. He's seeing how these products which are being sold are being put on, or being loved, or being emotionally involving to the characters. Another thing I recently discovered, there's one of the most prolific film critics in the 1940s. He basically created modern film criticism, was Parker Tyler. And Parker Tyler's first book, Hollywood Hallucinations, was quoted 3 times in The Mechanical Bride. And when you read through Parker Tyler's Hollywood Hallucinations, there's so much overlap of content and of style with The Mechanical Bride, especially regarding Humphrey Bogart as a gangster, or this notion of somnambules, as Parker Tyler calls them. That it's led me to think that McLuhan was taking... he wanted to do, with Mechanical Bride, he wanted to do what Wyndham Lewis was doing in Europe, but he wanted to do it for America. And so to do it for America, he used film criticism and art criticism to sort of look at the American cultural landscape as a movie. So he's analyzing America itself as a movie. And so what else could the characters in the movie that is America, that is the Hollywood America, be, other than the actual at things being sold in advertisements and the actual media themselves?
That was good, Clinton. We're going to get into a lot of what you just said, and I'm glad you brought up book, because I want to thank Paul. You're up next, and it was indeed Paul's reaching out that this salon came about, because he's got a new book on science fiction compilation, which includes one of his works. So, Paul, any thoughts on this anthropomorphizing ads as characters?
Well, I have 2 points to make. One, I always loved the title, The Mechanical Bride, but never as much as now with, as you just said, the anthology Robots Through the Ages, because the Mechanical Bride literally shifts your focus to a robot. I mean, what does mechanical mean? That could actually be a bride. So once again, McLuhan was, the book comes out in the early 1950s, but his head was decades and even most of a century ahead of the 1950s in terms of all the science fiction. And some of these science fiction stories actually appear in Robots Through the Ages, in which a human being can marry a robot, can have sex with a robot, etc., etc. The other point I just want to briefly make is I once had a conversation in one of my conversations with Marshall McLuhan. In fact, it was at a media ecology conference in the Catskills. And he turned to me and he said, pretty much out of the clear blue sky, what do you think of Julian Jaynes' breakdown of consciousness, in the bicameral mind, or whatever the title of it is? And I told him what I thought of it. I said, I think it's an interesting hypothesis. I don't know if I agree with it. And Marshall looks at me and says, it's science fiction. And I don't think he meant that totally as a compliment.
Oh, no, I'm sorry he did. He meant that as a huge compliment. I was Julian Jaynes' final student.
Okay.
Julian Jaynes was very, very, and I met with Julian Jaynes 3 months before he died. And he said, if I had it to do over again, I would do it like McLuhan did. And I would not talking about various disruptions in peoples of the sea and the Mediterranean. It's the alphabet. No, I'm sorry. That is a wrong interpretation.
All right. Well, thank you for the correction. But the impression I nonetheless had is it was, at least in that exchange, it was not so much of a compliment, because he really had nothing more to say about Julian Jaynes. I had basically explained to him what I agreed with, what I didn't agree with. And just to say it's science fiction in that tone of voice, at least it seemed to me at the time that Marshall was dismissing the book.
Not even.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to say one other thing. I also did talk to Marshall. He once asked me who I thought was the most important science fiction author, and I said, well, it's hard to determine that. I mean, it's usually Isaac Asimov, but I had just read for the second time Olaf Stapleton's First Man, Last Man, which I highly recommend, because there are very few science fiction novels that are so cosmic. And we talked for about a half an hour about that book. And so, yes, I mean, he did love certain science fiction, but I don't think he loved all science fiction. But anyway.
H.G. Wells is the answer to the question, because he invented the genre. And H.G. Wells was exactly in the mode of McLuhan. Are you an optimist or a pessimist? And the answer, of course, is neither. I am an apocalypsist. And H.G. Wells had positioned himself very effectively as an apocalypsist. And that's what science fiction is. It's apocalypse. Apocalypse is revelation. Apocalypse is not the end of the world. Apocalypse is not, it's just another word for revelation. Marshall McLuhan was an apocalypsist. Yeah. Science fiction is apocalypse, revelation.
It's great, Mark. Let me just interrupt for a second, Paul, and we'll get back to you and then go to Mark. What you were talking about, Paul, evoked Frank Zappa in Joe's Garage, where the robot goes, "Pluke me now, you savage rascal." So a lot of these people have been, like, what's the difference between a dildo and a Miss Pinky doll in the long run? But Julian Jaynes,
how many Barbie dolls have been used as dildos?
Right. But Mark, here's the interesting thing about Julian James's book. The graphic got put in Laws of Media. you know, so it's an interesting thing what you're saying. But Paul, you're going to make a comment, and then Mark, you're going to talk, if you could, on the anthropomorphizing of characters. But go ahead, Paul.
Well, just a quick thing. This is an endless debate. Who is the first science fiction author? I mean, you can go. Homer actually had an artificial being in his work. So, but no one would say that Homer is the first science fiction writer. I actually think that H.G. Wells was certainly one of the most important first science fiction writers, but by no means was the first science fiction writer. And, it's been argued, and I tend to agree, that Mary Shelley and her work Frankenstein was science fiction. But I have to admit, I'm very kindly disposed to Mary Shelley these days, because one of my non-robot stories, It's Real Life, won the Mary Shelley Award just last month from the Media Ecology Association. But other than my egotism, Frankenstein is a masterpiece. And then, although Jules Verne, I don't think, is as powerful as H.G. Wells, you can't dismiss him as the grandfather of science fiction. And he was publishing novels, decades before H.G. Wells.
Yeah.
Right. But he was not an apocalypsist.
Okay, well, that's your definition.
Yeah, but let's go into Mark, your discussion on Marshall's quote to his mom about ads and comics cast as characters. This anthropomorphizing, what does characters mean there? What is that quote? What is he saying to his mom there, in your opinion, Mark?
Remember what's going on here with Marshall. Marshall is not like us. He's not trying to take in everybody as if they deserve to be taken in. He is making subconsciously, sometimes quite clearly, various decisions, and those decisions are based upon being, as he was, a Catholic convert at the age of 24. So he made his mind up to join a crusade, literally. And in that time period, the characters that were interesting to be personified were Jews. And so Marshall McLuhan was a hardcore anti-Semitic, as we would define things today. As we would define things today. As it turns out, Marshall McLuhan was a very deep student of not just Chesterton, which is sort of the obvious superficial, but Marshall never was satisfied with that. So he went below the Chesterton, and he found Belloc. And Belloc is more or less ignored today, even though he's far more brilliant than Chesterton and much funnier and a lot more interesting, because he wrote a book called The Jews. And he didn't say anything nasty about the Jews. He just said they're not the same. Not the same as us. So we're allowing this foreign thing, alien thing, into our culture, and we should treat them well. But we have to recognize that they're aliens.
Well, he had an entire essay entitled "Canada Needs More Jews" that he tried to have published in the mid '40s, before the secession of World War II. That was very sternly polemical about the need for importing. He says 1 million. Right. My argument is to show, I'm reading directly from my copy from the archives. This is Marshall McLuhan circa 1942. My argument is to show that the Jews are the kind of people we need and always will be. First, Canada needs more people.
The kind of people. What kind of people is that?
Yeah, it's
aliens. It's aliens. Canada is a Protestant country. He's a Catholic.
Well, no, they're
He's
actually
saying the best thing that a Protestant country like Canada could do is to import a bunch of aliens.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the essay. Has anybody
No,
ever
I'm not familiar at all. I'm familiar with Marshall.
Yeah. Has anybody ever noticed how non-human Canadian poetry is? It never gets away from Union Station. That is Canadian scenery. The counter argument. Sorry, I haven't read this in a while, but
he's a Catholic in a Protestant country.
The
No
Jews
wonder he's upset.
To assist us in overcoming the problems of our social values because they have a genius for social life and community which is irrepressible. But before pointing out why they would serve our present needs as Canadian better than any other people, let me state the case against them. Some of my worst friends were Jews. Years of American residence have given me full view of their less admirable characteristics. When a highly cultivated French or English Jew meets a Jew from a brutal American industrial city, he winces, quote, 5,000 years of tradition and you talk and think this way, end quote. In our vices and virtues, the Jew is always like us, only more so, because he abounds in energy and imagination, he will always go us one better, and it's entirely his own fault if he improves on our vices. If he insists on making our dull greed and imaginative depravity into something bright and brazenly gay, for the Jew just as often improves on our virtues as by the same energy and imagination. What about Walt Disney? Anyway, so he's making this count.
Clinton, just to clarify, this is a document you found in Ottawa that's not accessible to all of us.
Right.
But it makes total sense.
Yeah.
The Catholic, the Judeo-Christian is saying,
anyway,
as living in a terrible Protestant country, we need more Jews.
I brought this up. Yeah. He wants, right, this entire argument here, as he goes on, is, they're intellectual and artistic people. We are not. We can't afford to condescend to them at all. But the unexampled miseries which afflict them today provides us with an opportunity to do ourselves a great service. Anyway, he's making a strong point for massive immigration from Europe. I'm just not sure that Hilaire Belloc was as central to, say, Wyndham Lewis, who also campaigned heavily for the import of and for the saving graces after his early book on Hitler blew up in his face. I don't know. I don't think it's that important.
Hold on, Mark. One thing I said,
way off base here, actually.
One thing I didn't. You're up next, Paul, but we'll come back to you, Mark. Okay. One thing I didn't want the salon to do is becoming into like arguing. What we're doing is just we're probing or airing thoughts. So if someone doesn't agree with your thought, there can be a salon where we have debating. But in this salon, we're going to kind of stick to airing your thoughts. So, Paul, you had something to add, and then Mark will go back to you. Go ahead.
Just two things. One, very, very brief, and then the other I'll spend a tiny bit more time on. The very brief point I want to make is I'm Jewish. Marshall knew that I was Jewish. We had a very close relationship. For whatever it's worth, I didn't detect even a whiff of anti-Semitism. So maybe he was putting on an act, but I'm just reporting that for whatever it's worth. But
I said, Paul, as we consider anti-Semitism as occurred yesterday in the JFK Jr. testimony, as we consider it. I didn't say that.
I had a second point, Mark. I had a second point to make, which is really more important. And the second point is there's no doubt that Marshall read and admired the work of outright anti-Semites and fascists, and their poetry, their writing, etc. This raises a very important question, which perhaps we can talk about a little, what we certainly should at least note in this discussion. And the question is, should an author's or poet's politics ban us from reading the person's work and critiquing the person's work? And, the most extreme example of this is Adolf Hitler was a painter. Should we not allow or not support any museum anywhere in the world that wants to display Hitler's paintings? I understand that upsets many people, and especially people who are Jewish, as I am. But I come down on the side of, I think you do have to separate the person's work from who the person is on the question of whether you should look at and consider the work. When you review and critique and analyze the work, it may be appropriate to bring in what the person's political agendas are. But the idea of just basically banning a person's work from a theorist's consideration or a reviewer's consideration, regardless of how horrible their political opinions are, I think is a very dangerous and destructive approach, because it shuts off a way that we can better understand these people and understand what it is they're trying to say.
Yeah, that's Paul. That's separate the art from the artist. Like, I'm not
No, not even close.
I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm anti-semantic. But go ahead, Mark. You want to like?
No,
we're not arguing.
That makes absolutely no sense. That is abstraction. That is reductionism. That is stupidity. I'm sorry. It turns out that art is an expression of the subconscious of the person who is the artist, in relationship to the audience, which has a subconscious which it cannot express. So the artist is the antenna of the race. He's attempting to express the subconscious of the race at that time. And so the deepest feelings, as expressed in politics and so forth, must be integrated with the work of that person. But it has to be understood. The problem is you use words like fascist. Now, my guess is that you don't know what a fascist is. A fascist is not somebody who is anti-Jewish. A fascist is a corporativist. A fascist is somebody who allows government to be run by corporations. We live in a fascist country. It's called friendly fascism, if you like, but fascism has a etymology. It has an origin. It is not a floating term. It turns out that if you allow the corporations to dominate, so who pays for elections in the United States? Pays for it. There's a lot of expenses, local expenses, so forth. Government has to pay people's salaries and so forth. But overwhelmingly, elections in the United States, the money that is collected is spent on negative television advertising. And that money is 80%, as best I can tell, paid by rich guys. That's not democratic. But we have a situation where rich people pay for negative television advertising, and we call it democracy. Foolish. Totally foolish. Fascism is not at all what you're describing here. If somebody was actually a fascist, which means a corporativist, that would mean we would exclude everything paid for by Citibank, everything paid for by Microsoft, IBM. If we were going to exclude the fascists, there wouldn't be much money being paid to art.
Well, I have a very different view of fascism.
Wait. Hold on a second. Mark, let's again, we want to be gracious. I air your ideas, but we don't need to attack each other and call each other names. Name calling isn't going to move the project forward.
I'm not name calling, I'm clarifying.
Okay, that clarifying is fine.
I didn't say that Paul was
that's fine, because this is and I'm going to have you up, Paul, in a second. Okay. But this is very important, because we're going into the next point, which is exactly dealing with this idea of Marshall's suspended judgment understanding is not having a point of view. So go ahead, Paul, just briefly. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, just briefly, I want to offer, first, thank you, Mark, for the clarifications. But I just want to offer my, for whatever it's worth, my definition of fascism. And it's not at all like Mark's. There are two, I think, primary characteristics of fascists. First, they don't care about the truth. And second, if you disagree with their opinion, ultimately their final move is to kill you. So those, I think, are the two signal characteristics of fascists.
There's nothing to do with fascism.
As far as corporations are concerned,
Nothing to do with it.
Corporations are a completely separate thing. It is true that fascists tend to enjoy getting corporate money, et cetera, but corporations are very different from fascism.
Hold on. That was good. Hold on, Mark. I'm going to have Clinton in a second, but it is an interesting fact that the gentleman who made the most banned TV commercial of all times, Tony Schwartz, was a close associate of Marshall McLuhan. And now the funny thing is you can watch that Daisy LBJ commercial all you want on YouTube over and over. And we know how important Tony Schwartz was in regards to Marshall McLuhan. Okay, Clinton, go ahead.
So I've been reading. I'm reading through all the books of Robert A. Brady, who was an economist at UCLA, who got his doctorate studying the economy of Germany from about 1926 to 1929, and then he wrote his doctorate. It's called The Rationalization of German Industry, and he analyzes how the material basis of the economy was being systematically rationalized. And so the rationalization movement was the increase towards efficiency and calibrating the interplay between centralized governance against decentralized local decision making to an optimal way to recover the economy as best as possible after its utter destruction after World War I. So Germany had the best minds on how to rebuild because they had so much to make up for having lost so much of their territory to France.
This is Weimar Germany before the election of Hitler.
Correct. So he writes his thesis about the economy of Germany, leaves Germany in 1929. All this stuff happens, and then he writes his second book, which is a very famous book titled "The Spirit and Structure of German Fascism," which is what I'm reading through now. Now we understand fascism originally, is an Italian concept, which was
Yes.
imported into Germany. And
well, not really. National Socialism is not the same as fascism, but yes, it's an Italian concept.
Well, yes, I understand. So if we're going to play semantics and discuss fascism as purely a Italian concept, then the term has no usage outside of a specific historical point. We have to generalize the term in order to use it descriptively.
Yeah, right. It's the bundling together, and what is bundling together?
Right.
You know the answer to the question. You know what happened in Italy.
Right, Mark. I agree with you that the strict centralized control of economics through government control of the bodies, which then appoint the leaders of countries, was a core part of German fascism. The leaders of companies. Basically, every CEO of every company became the leader, de facto dictator of their company, and they were appointed by the government. And so the government took over the corporations as much as the corporations took.
No, it was the other way around. But I actually have met Italian industrialists. De Benedetti, Fiat was the one that I met, and so I'm familiar with fascism.
Right, and so seeing as we got on this topic with regards to anti-Semitism, the fact that the leader inhabits the spirit of the people, and the spirit of the people speak through him, and the people say, we don't want any of these alien races, and their science was entirely right. They put out statistics about how conquered all their industries were based on insane math that didn't make sense to anybody who didn't live in the country, and their totalitarian shaping of scientific bodies and purging of people who didn't go along with the people's will of what science was, which was basically whatever the party said it was. Like, you're both...
You mean Fauci now. You're talking about Fauci. Sounds like this is follow the science.
Throw around analogies to contemporary times on both sides of every political aisle, I do believe. Nevertheless, you're both arguing about different facets of a complex, holistic thing, which was the country of, from what I'm reading about, Nazi Germany, because the social aspect does have all the elements that's Paul's talking about, but nevertheless, yes, the economic structure and the centralization and the merger or marriage of corporations with government bureaucracy and central planning wasn't absolutely essential to accomplishing anything that a fascist government
Hold on,
accomplish.
Mark, hold on. Please raise your hand, because we're going to allow people to make their point, and within making their point or expressing their ideas, if you wait until I call on you, then they make their point, then I'll call on you to react to their point. Please, it really helps, because there's crossover and we don't hear what's going on. There's two people talking at once, and even though we want to live in Finnegan's wake in a Robert Altman film, we actually have the ability to raise your hand, please. Okay, so Paul, hold on 1 second, because this is the next thing I would like to go into, and you can start, Paul, and add your point, what you want to say. And that is, we brought up the Mechanical Bride at the beginning. We know that there's some connection with Marcel Duchamp, because that's what he called the car, the Mechanical Bride. So there was some crossover with Marshall being aware of Duchamp. Duchamp's line that I love to repeat is, there's no solution because there's no problem. Now that sounds Pollyanna and mamby-pamby like who I am. Yeah, right. You're just avoiding the big picture. But we invented words, and Mark, this is something that we're addressing in regards to Lily Tomlin's great line, reality is just a collective hunch. We could take each word that is said by people today and tear it down etymologically in the environment of this discussion. So we want to keep the discussion going. So of course, every word we go with is somewhat of a collective hunch. We want to think we know what the word Mechanical Bride means, and we don't have to tear each word down. I loved your breakdown on a pessimist, optimist, and apocalypse. That's really important. I agree with that. But when Duchamp said there's no solution because there's no problems, it actually kind of evokes when it's been said that Duchamp turned the tools of science into art. So this, again, is just the use of words, and our salon is called science fiction. So he turned the tools of science into art. How, the question is what does this mean to you when Marshall said suspended judgment is understanding is having no point of view? What does that mean in regards to our thing, in regards to our discussion? So hold on, Mark. Paul's up, and then you're up after Paul. But please raise your hand when you have something to add in the middle of anyone's discussion. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay, first to answer your question, what that apt quote of yours from Duchamp reminds me of many people, including song lyricists, have said in one way or another that rather than looking for answers to questions, we should look for questions to answers. And I think that reversal is a very useful technique for furthering our knowledge. But what I did want to say, to sort of swing this slightly back to robots, another characteristic of fascism is the demonization of others, whether they're Jews, gypsies, as happened in Nazi Germany. And one of the most interesting things, I think, in science fiction about robots, and there are stories in robots through the ages that do this, is that, you know, there are all kinds of things that robots can do to humans and humans can do to robots. You know, the typical, most frequent thing probably is robots get smarter and smarter, eventually don't want to be slaves and kill us. Then there's the reversal. Robots become our best friends. We can fall in love with a robot. They really help us in our lives. But I think a theme that's not explored as much as it could be and should be, because it does have relevance to this question of fascism, is the demonization of robots by
Yeah.
humans. And in fact, we just had a very recent example of that with Fran Dressler, who is president of SAG on strike, in which, and by the way, I support this strike very strongly. I want to see them make more money. I want to see them have more benefits. But she wrongly said that robots are replacing us in all aspects of life. And, so that was her way of saying the studios need to take the AI question more seriously. But unfortunately, she couched her concern in just an outright incorrect demonization of robots.
Yeah, no, that was good, Paul. And talk about suspended judgment. What does Marshall mean by suspended judgment? Because indeed, you're saying, hey, I'm pro unions in labor. Hey, we're pro that. This should be divided equally. How much this guy gets and these puny actors get. That's an issue. Labor, labor rights in the working class and the ruling class. But when Marshall says suspended judgment, understanding is not having a point of view, you touched on that. But what does it really mean? What's the hidden psychic effect of that meaning? Just go ahead.
Yeah, well, no, I think it's a very valuable, at the very least, a very valuable technique of research to suspend your judgment. And basically, it goes back, to philosophy and psychology. If you embark on research and you are already biased, that is, you have a point of view before you start your research and you're guided by that, you are going to potentially miss a lot of important information, because as we all know, we do suffer from confirmation bias. McLuhan talked about that in Understanding Media, his discussion of the Narcissus myth. We want to reinforce our own opinions, and we fall in love with our own opinions. And so suspending your disbelief is an important way of trying to keep that in check. Because if we really want to have a better understanding of what's going on, it sounds trite to say this, but we need an open mind. The less we approach this with a hardened point of view, a hardening of the categories, the less likely we'll be to recognize some important new development.
Yeah. Hold on, Mark, you're up, and then Clinton. But here's the thing. I'm going to ask Paul this question and then go to Mark. Is bias more innate or more invented? Is having a bias more innate or more invented?
Well, I think it's both. I mean, that's a weak answer because but let me just.
Okay, that's fine. Don't worry. That's not a weak answer. You did it. Okay, Mark, two things to tackle here. What did Marshall mean by suspended judgment? Understanding is not having a point of view. And first, is having a bias more innate or more invented?
It's very straightforward. Bias is formed in the age we go to grammar school, roughly from the age of 8 until 12, before our biology takes over and we prepare our bodies for reproduction. This is called grammar school. So the structure of the world, as we come to understand it, between the ages of 8 and 12, roughly, that's our bias. And we'll never get rid of it. And so therefore, the only way to change the world, is to change the grammar of the situation in which 8 to 12-year-olds are forming their understanding of the world. When Marshall McLuhan said we should suspend our judgment, he was simply arguing against everybody around him who was formed differently than he was. Marshall McLuhan was formed in a bizarre way, and some of us have been formed in even more bizarre ways than Marshall was. But Marshall exhibited already when he was in Winnipeg a very deep disagreement as an undergraduate in Winnipeg, taking his courses, his comments on the courses. You have to go to the archives, and that's exactly, obviously, where Clinton's been, other people have been. And when you go there, you recognize that he was arguing with his professors in junior high school. He was arguing all the way through the course of these things, and he didn't trust what they were saying. And he ultimately came to the view that he was surrounded by idiots. And that's why he wanted to import Jews, because the Jews were a hell of a lot smarter than the Canadians. And he was surrounded by knuckleheads. And ultimately, he decided that was the reason why he had to become Catholic. So the suspension of judgment on Marshall's point to his audience, when he said things like that, was, you're really stupid. You've come to wrong conclusions. So suspend your judgment. And listen to me. And I'll probe and I'll find out whether you have any inclination to pay attention to what's actually going on in the world. And of course, by and large, he failed. Marshall was not a successful intellectual. He never rose to the level of really engaging, if you will, the powerful, except for one remarkable incident where he was brought by his mentor. In fact, Marshall, we wouldn't know about Marshall had it not been for his success at the University of Toronto, where one man, the man that had handled his Ford Foundation contract, and then ultimately became the president of the university, and therefore gave him the coach house, and all of this flowed from one man. And this one man that Marshall convinced that he needed to be heard took him to Bilderberg in May of 1969. And the letter that has been published, Dear Prince Bernard, I was a bad boy at Bilderberg. What happened is he walked into the room, the chairs were all in lines, and he said, no, we have to rearrange them in circles. So this is a very straightforward thing with the most ostensibly powerful people in the world. The only time that I know of Marshall McLuhan ever engaging the powerful. It obviously blew up in his face. He had to apologize. He wasn't invited back. Only one time, May 69, did he go. By the way, this is all published online. You can actually get the participants. And more importantly, it turns out that Daniel Bell, who at that point was the head of the sociology department at Harvard, had written a book and published it called The End of Ideology. So as it turns out, May of 69, important. Turns out it's a year after May of 68. Turns out that France had exploded on ideological basis. Bilderberg was freaked out. Bilderberg got Bell to write an essay basically apologizing for the fact that he was wrong in his End of Ideology, because in fact ideology mattered again. And Bell was invited, and so was president of University of Toronto, and so was Marshall McLuhan, his protege. And the whole thing is absolutely crucial to understanding our current situation. We're in another version of Bilderberg 1969 right now today.
Okay, Mark, that was a lot to digest. That was well articulated. And we'll get back to you. Let's keep everybody's, I always say, keep your answers down to 3 to 5 words, which means stay brief so we can keep it flowing. There was a lot there, and I especially loved, but calling people idiots and knuckleheads, again, goes back to Frank Zappa when he said stupidity is the building block of the universe. And what Marshall taught me and a lot of people is, how do you flip stupidity into epiphanies and everydayness? His real hero, James Joyce of Finnegan's Wake. We can flip this.
No, as a matter of fact, you can. James Joyce succeeded in selling $85,000 books that have blue paper covers in them. James Joyce.
Okay, Mark, raise your hand. Mark, raise your hand if you want, because I'm going to talk for a second. But I do like that Marshall was not a success, because my friend was at a cocktail party with Richard Schinkel, the great writer for Time Magazine film critic. And he says, so what do you think of McLuhan? And Schinkel goes, fraud. And then he turns back to him and he goes, well, semi-fraud. And I think there's a lot packed into what you just said, and very important. It's documented on our live TV show right here. And we want to shout out to Andrew McLuhan, who's indeed listening and chatting. But it's your moment here, Clinton, to first of all address, is having bias more innate or more invented? And then what did your take on Marshall's suspended judgment? Understanding is not having a point of view. Go ahead, Clinton.
Bias could mean everything from, the fact that we evolved in water, and so water looks clear to us because we're biased to certain spectrums of the light frequency that water allows to pass through us, and that's wholly physiological. But I'm sure you mean bias as cognitive bias. I'm sure you mean it as predisposition, and so that would be very environmental as well. I mean, it's again, I don't want to get too deep into the semantics of that. Lots of things are socialized, but we've got lots of inherent physiological biases that we can kind of change and shape and ameliorate somewhat with an overabundance of pressure, and that's what social engineering is all about, is trying to break humans out of their sometimes natural, sometimes environmentally given biases or proclivities. You can't, right? I think it's dehumanizing to think of people as blank slates that can be totally either automated, programmed, like a robot. And here's where I think Paul is his arguing from science fiction premise sort of implicitly grants the idea that, well, we can have robots smart enough that we ought to treat them with respect and humanity as we would other people, because humans can't be the only life forms in the universe premise, which abounds in science fiction. And so I always think of science fiction as using androids or aliens as metaphors for other humans. And personally, when it comes to actual AI and actual robots in my real life, I'd much rather keep them under my thumb, so to speak, than argue some sort of egalitarian inclusion with a post-human AI as anything real or human or worthy of, right? Like, my humanism is rather, sorry, what I'm saying, Gerry, I don't think robots will ever be human. And if they fool us into thinking that we are, that's just our own, that's our own fault for creating things that can fool us.
Yeah.
That's sort of my political perspective on that issue. But
yeah,
McLuhan was talking about mechanization and somnambulism, and when cultural commentators 100 years ago were when Rossum's Universal Robots came out, and issues of free will which have always abounded in philosophy, became of the utmost importance in the face of say the Soviet plans to really actually automate people, and human engineering and psychology exploiting Freud and advances in science that saw actual people as meat robots to be programmed, and like, that's scary totalitarian stuff, and recognizing the humanity in people who you still think are dumber than you is a fine line. And I think McLuhan, to Mark's point about he was surrounded by people he thought were idiots, and he had to go to England to get a little bit of emotional or intellectual challenge for once in his life, escaping Manitoba, right? There's a huge megalomania and egotism behind looking at other people who and dehumanizing them because you've got some faculty or some perception, or better than them about something, and avoiding the dehumanization of people, which it's so easy to manipulate them as if they were robots. And look, the way society can make everyone into an NPC is the term today, right? Look at how everyone's brainwashed by the media and regurgitating talking points. Are you even alive, right? That's where the discourse is right now. We dehumanize each other, looking at each other as being programmed, socially constructed, all these things. And that's McLuhan's humanism was ameliorating that to a large degree.
Clinton, so well put. We don't want to dehumanize here. We want to share in our human commonality. Now, Paul has a brief point, and then we'll go to you, Mark. And then we got our next round robin question. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, first of all, I very much like Clinton's first point that we all have, in effect, biological biases.
Yeah.
We're born with biases, and as we develop, those biases are expressed. We can work against them, but they're there. And that makes a very, very important point about the limitations of AI and robots. And the point is, intelligence, our human intelligence, arose via natural selection in a biological matrix. And
Not
the
even.
idea,
Hold on, Mark. Let him finish, and then you're
But
next.
I must
I don't want to
intervene. That's
be so
not possible.
provocative to you, but
Hold on.
Not possible.
even though our intelligence arose in this biological matrix, a lot of people wrongly think we can sort of go around that and create some kind of equivalent intelligence without the biological matrix. And I actually have been thinking about this for decades, and I call that putting Descartes before the horse. Meaning we're not going to get the intelligence until we have the biology. And that's why I think, robots and AI and androids are exciting, wonderful science fiction, but they are nothing like what we, in fact, have in reality.
Very good. Okay, Mark, you were going to respond in briefly, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trained as a Darwinian geneticist. I graduated undergraduate, University of Wisconsin, and then came back again for a PhD in molecular biology. It turns out that that biological matrix that has just been described is completely rejected by today's biologists. We're in a remarkable time period in which physics has collapsed, biology has collapsed, social science has collapsed, according to the people who are in those fields. No one actually believes any of that stuff anymore. I'm sorry, you're a friend and a wonderful person, but you're not a biologist, you're not a physicist, and I am a biologist, and I know a great deal about this, and it turns out that all of those sciences are gone, kaput. So it turns out that this materialist approach that human beings' intelligence, it's actually not intelligence, it's the soul. The human soul, of which intelligence is just one or actually multiple faculties. There are a whole bunch of faculties of the soul. The human soul did not develop, because it's not material, the human soul did not develop materially. And the recognition of that is so strong in China today. It turns out in the world context, the West has lost. There's no other result than lost, because it takes a materialist view and does not understand the human soul as something different.
Okay. Mark, good point. I just reiterate a question I've asked you all in my podcast interviews with you. Is Alan Turing in the 50s? Is thinking a function of the soul? He didn't say one way or the other. He asked it as a question. What we're doing is inventing new questions here. Okay, Clinton, your thought, and then I'm going to go with you with the next question. So go ahead, Clinton.
So my first interpretation of Paul's term biological matrix was from cognitive science and the idea that intelligence is necessarily embodied. Right? I know, Mark, that cognitive science is ultimately reducible to materialism when you think about it as a large-scale project in the way that it's mostly been talked about for the past few decades. But cognitive science is not falling apart so much as radically changing to include aspects of and trying to incorporate aspects of Western philosophy, including Aristotle and notions of the soul and religion, in order to try and understand what it's been missing the past few decades. And I'm pointing to the work of John Vervaeke, I guess. He's sort of one of the central figures. But in this, I don't know, fourth state cognitive science, right?
He's a vaudeville figure, but anyway.
Yeah, he's got a great act then. So embodiments. When you're talking about we are born in the biological matrix, Paul, what you're saying is that we, as evolved intelligences, develop everything we know out of being embodied humans with skin and senses and flesh, and when we grow up our entire lives, navigating and sensing the world first and foremost, and so this idea of intelligence inside a computer. I think you can't have intelligence inside a computer trapped in a box. That's perfect. You're Cartesian, right? You point to the fallacy of Descartes there. I don't know that what you're saying, Mark, is incompatible with where cognitive science is at right now. I mean, biological matrix doesn't mean like ecology from the 60s, like we're all part of the food pyramid or something. The food pyramid, like you know what I'm saying, right?
Soylent Green, exactly. Soylent Green.
Ecological or biological so much as it grows out of cybernetics, right? And yes, the cybernetic view of intelligence as symbolic processing is falling apart, because at every degree, intelligence is what's the term that they use? It's combinatorially explosive, which means like several orders of infinitely impossibly great orders.
But the premises are wrong.
Wolfram, Mark, let him
computation.
You can't.
Mark, we understand, but let him make his point. Then raise your hand and you can respond, because if you talk over him, we can't hear him.
You can't reduce human intelligence to symbolic processing.
No.
If you could. Well, you can't, because there's several orders of infinity at every level of what it is that you could ever try to capture, if you could capture it. Now,
There's no infinity in reality. No, it's not infinity.
That's it. The abstraction of intelligence. Now, we are creating things right now that can read people's thoughts and finish their sentences and detect what's in their brain and create pictures of what they're thinking. We're on the threshold of literally merging minds and brains together. So whatever our machines are measuring is capturing something of the psyche, of cognition that is going on, and it must be a material sense, because we got machines that can read them. We can see it. It's happening. So there's right. This is an old discussion in rationalist communities about how can we sense something that's not material, without reducing everything to materiality in the brain. It's an open question.
Okay, that was good, Clinton. I'm gonna ask another question. We'll go round robin. We'll start with Clinton. And I appreciate it, because I think we're united together as people who appreciate the book as a tool. We're celebrating Paul's release of his book. We've read a lot of books to formulate what we're saying today with spoken word. And we know what Mallarmé said about a book, and Borges and all these great book people. And we know how important books were to Marshall. In fact, Alfred Jarry, King Ubu, in 1895 said the science of imaginating solutions. That's pataphysics. And so Martha Graham, and this is going to Paul's point about predicting, Martha Graham said, great artists aren't ahead of their times. They are their times. And so, since both Joyce and Zappa said all times are happening now, we're right here, right now. This is live TV. So we're conspiring. We're breathing together. And here's a couple of the things that sci-fi people predicted. In 1932, Aldous Huxley predicted antidepressants. In 1953, the year I was born, the guy right down the street, Ray Bradbury, forecast earbuds, thimble radios, which everybody uses now. In 1968, Arthur C. Clarke predicted flat screen like the iPad. And also, since we're participating in television telephones right now, they were displayed in New York City, not far from Mark and Paul, at the New York World's Fair in 1939, the same year Finnegan's Wake came out. And then in 68, we all saw the movie that Kubrick said I made 2001 to convolate McLuhan in the Playboy interview. We saw television telephone. He calls his daughter from the spaceship, just like on a Zoom-like thing we're on right now, and wishes her a happy birthday. Foucault said, I'm no prophet. My job is making windows where there was once walls. It really evokes Joyce saying mistakes are portals of discovery. So Clinton laid out problems of what's going on. Paul, Mark, you laid out problems. The question's always like, well, what are you going to do about it? So what tool, this is the question, Alice in Wonderland, she went down the looking glass. How do you flip the looking glass into a door? And as Huxley said, the doors of perception. What do you lubricate your doors of perception with? What tool? Clinton, you're up. What tool do you suggest?
We have to open all the black boxes, the ones which can be opened, before we can figure out what we don't know yet. Because by artificial means, we don't understand our computers. And that's by neglect of our education systems and the expediency of budgets and the greed of corporations and the fascism of software companies that are bilking you through the nose to continue to use the products you pay for by turning everything you bought into a service you have to pay for monthly now, right? The business models are terrible. And people can't be oriented in a world when the things they need just to navigate, which they buy and ostensibly own, they don't actually own and can't understand anymore. So the tool that I recommend is free software and open hardware and right to repair movements and taking back not the means of production, but our means of home economy and basic functioning and real technological and computer literacy, which is not what we're getting today from the education system or from most things that parade around in that name, which are, they're all sellouts. So that's fun.
Yeah, very good. That's like Al Flipside said, don't sell out, sneak in. And I think concerned netizens, you've snuck in really well, Clinton, in so many ways. And I recommend everybody to read your stuff on New Explorations and Substack.
I snuck into MIT's Media Lab 3 months ago when I was in Boston visiting the Free Software Foundation. And I was around outside waiting for someone to come out, and I'm like, oh, I can't find my card. Oh, no. And I snuck in.
Very good. Okay, Paul, and then Mark. What you got the question basically. We know you can define the problem. What is your tool solution? Your solution tool?
Well, I think there are many lubricants, but as long as we're talking about science fiction, I think science fiction is one of the prime lubricants. And Marvin Minsky, who was an AI scientist who taught at MIT, said many times that what inspired him, Minsky, to go into AI as something he wanted to study and help develop were Isaac Asimov's robot stories. And Paul Krugman, who is a Nobel laureate in economics, said the Foundation trilogy had the same impact on him. So I think that, unfortunately, to this very day, there are still all kinds of people who consider science fiction just sort of escapist entertainment. Some of it is, but some of it is much deeper than that. But as long as I have the floor, or whatever the correct metaphor is for this, let me just very quickly say about the soul, which we've been talking about. To me, the word soul is just a placeholder for what we don't understand about how we human beings think and live and feel. And you can get into endless debates. Do dogs have souls? Do dolphins and chimps have souls? And some people would say yes, some people would say no, but nobody, I think, would argue about the fact that, as far as we know, dolphins have not had anyone like an Isaac Asimov, like a Mozart, like a Marshall McLuhan, and that's because the difference between dolphins and us is that we have souls. But that doesn't mean we understand what the soul is. It's just a placeholder for this vast question mark.
Well, Mark
Really good, Paul.
the cogitative faculties, but keep it short, Mark.
No, wait, Clinton. We didn't hear what you said at the end. Thank you, Paul. And then what did you say, Clinton?
It's interesting. I liked seeing where you guys are coming from, because Mark, I know, and I think we've all at least dabbled a little bit in reading about his deep studies of Thomas Aquinas, and the inner senses and the inner sensorium. And so what Mark is coming from here is based largely within that framework, which develops out of Aristotle and changes upon Aristotle and fuses so many different traditions. And yeah, that would reject the cognitive science and especially the Marvin Minsky view of human cognition completely. So I think that's why we're having so much fun in this conversation.
It is truly fun. That was a great word. And Mark, it's an honor to have you here, and it raised a lot of eyebrows. And this is important. What's the solution tool you suggest, Mark?
We're all children of Marshall McLuhan in this conversation. And so the solution can only be extending Marshall.
Yeah.
Marshall had no grasp of psychology. He wound up borrowing figure ground and so forth from Gestalt, but he wasn't really connected with Gestalt. He was a Catholic who rejected psychoanalysis, rejected Freud, Jung, and so forth. So he wound up by default sort of in this Gestalt basin. The real tragedy of Marshall McLuhan is that he did not understand faculty psychology. He did not understand the faculties of the soul as developed, starting with Aristotle, moving all the way through, very importantly, Aquinas. And so my answer to your question, Gerry, is read Aquinas.
Yeah, it's good.
In particular, read Aquinas' commentary on Aristotle's De Anima. De Anima, anima is the Latin term for soul. Greek term is psyche. I'm agreeing here that soul as an English language word, which turns out coming from strange sources. If you look at etymological dictionaries on soul, it's somehow coming from northern German lakes or something or other. It's a odd term in English. So anima in Greek, Latin rather, psyche in Greek. The Aquinas' commentary on Peripsyche, Aristotle's on the soul, is the tool, but obviously very few people today can actually start with that. And so the task becomes, how do you develop people who can read that work and benefit from it? And so that's why I have a university, online university that I've started called Trivium University. We're about to finish our summer school, experimental summer school. Trivium's got about 20 people involved over the summer, and it's been absolutely marvelous. I've learned an enormous amount. And now we're going to head into a business where we charge $500 a course for tuition and put together money for scholarships and so forth. So we're a part of the, if you will, the alternative university theme here. And so I'm talking with University of Austin, my friends who are on the board there, and others about affiliating, as it turns out, historically, we have no interest in granting degrees. We have no interest in granting certificates. But it turns out that historically, Columbia, Harvard, as many people here know, have had these sort of experimental schools. So we've done one. And so this experimental school ultimately will help to equip people to read Aquinas's commentary on Aristotle's Peripsyche to understand the soul.
Good, Mark. That was a good. I love your solution. It was extending Marshall and reading Aquinas. So here we got the New Yorker's 10-page article. Paul, I hope you check it out, on Samuel Delany, July 10th issue. And he says, sci-fi's primary impulse, like poetry, is the incantatorial task of naming non-existent objects. So the magical task of naming non-existing objects. Really interesting gentleman. He even mentions Finnegan's Wake. I would say important science fiction writer, but you can check him out. But he's bringing up something like poetry. T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing our inner dialogue. Gary Snyder said that poetry, the task of the poet is to see the world without language, then put that seeing into language. And what I liked about the book that came out, The Lost Tetrads, is that Eric called tetrads a kind of cross between hieroglyphics and poetry. And so we know we're going to talk linearly here in doing a tetrad on sci-fi, but I hope we will not just remain linear and logical, that we will go for our impulse, our intuition, our hunch, and our guess. So doing a tetrad on sci-fi. Go ahead, Paul.
Just quickly on Samuel Delany, I want to share a profound personal experience I had when I was a student at City College in New York in the mid-1960s. I got a job as a page in the George Bruce branch of the New York Public Library located in Harlem. And as the librarians there discovered, all that I did on my breaks is read science fiction. You know, it was a great job. In fact, I have to admit, I read science fiction when I was working. You know, I'd be, basically helping people check out books and reading a great Isaac Asimov robot story. Anyway, the reason why I'm mentioning this is the head librarian there was Ruth Delany. And one day Ruth came over and talked to me, and she said, "Have you ever read any of my son's work?" And I said, "Well, who's your son?" And she said, "Well, Sam Delany." And at that point, Sam Delany had just published a couple of stories. And I said, "No, I haven't, but I'll look into him." And years later, when I had the pleasure of meeting Samuel Delany in person, I mean, really years later, it was probably like in the mid-1990s, I told him that story and he loved it. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, there's a character, Ruth Delany, in my first novel, The Silk Code, that I named after Sam Delany's mother.
Yeah, and Paul, if you haven't read the article, check it out. And it's funny because, I'm a big fan of this book, which I've never read, but I'm a fan because it's called More Than Human. It's by Theodore Sturges, came out in 1953, and Phil Lesh of The Dead and Frank Zappa both call it their favorite book. And Theodore Sturgeon was a huge influence on Sam, and he hit on Sam once. And Sam, in this article, he says, "That's like being hit on by William Shakespeare." So here we go. Clinton, you're up. What does sci-fi enhance or intensify? We're trying to keep our answers down to 3 to 5 words. You can elaborate. And it's not why sci-fi was invented. It's the environment that science fiction created is what we're doing the tetrad on. We can go for the obvious. Hey, why was sci-fi invented? To sell books. But what's the hidden psychic? There's something deeper. Clinton, you're up. What does sci-fi enhance or intensify?
First perception of the plausibly potential.
Very good. Paul.
The possible.
The possible. Man, you are brief, dude. Mark, what does sci-fi enhance or intensify?
Clinton is right. It enhances the potential, but the potential makes no sense without the actual. So the tension between the potential and the actual is what sci-fi is toying with. And everybody wants to know, are we now dealing with an actual version of what was previously in sci-fi? So it's that sci-fi heightens the attention on this difference between potential and actual.
It's really good, Mark. I would say my answer would be the gap. As Marshall said, the gap is where the action is. And he wasn't talking about the clothing store. The resonating interval. Boy, you guys are easy because I can just feed off of your brilliant probes. Okay, Clinton, what does sci-fi render obsolete? Forget about time. We're not talking about time. Time's out the window. What does it displace?
Oh, the known actual, to play off Mark's word there.
Yeah.
Or, I want to say almost positivist science, because positive science kind of went out as science fiction came in. So the positively defined world where science says it dictates what is true, right?
Yeah. It's funny because you go back to that Alfred, which I just ran into this morning. The science of imagining solutions. I mean, it's creepy how sci-fi, we all know this article, or you should know that article by Robert Guffey, where he said all the great sci-fi writers worked for the secret police to prepare us for this shit. Like Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, and the epitome is Philip K. Dick. He knew he was being controlled by the CIA, and right down here at Venice Library, he's going, help, help. But believe me, I went to sci-fi experts and I said, is that true? And they go, no, that's not true. Okay. You are up, Paul. What does sci-fi render obsolete or displace?
All right, well, first a joke, the CIA, since you just mentioned it. But here's my more serious answer, the certain.
Wait, I missed that. You mean
Okay.
One answer was the CIA. That's a good answer. It renders the CIA obsolete. Now
But that was a joke. I have a more
I
serious.
like jokes. Dude, behind every joke, there's a grievance. There's more truth to a joke. Okay, now your second answer.
The certain.
C-E-R-T-A-I-N. Yeah. Very good.
Curtain.
Yeah. Well, that's the Wizard of Us.
Yeah.
We are all atomic dogs pulling the curtain back, and to reveal the Emperor's wearing all kinds of clothes. Okay, Mark, you're up. What does sci-fi render obsolete or displace?
The relationship between sci-fi and paradigm shifts is the reason why I agreed to come into this conversation today.
Yeah.
As it turns out, in fact, at a certain era in sci-fi writing, and again, Paul knows a lot more about this than I do, people who were writing sci-fi were actually in touch with intelligence agencies. In fact, it's a Cold War fact. Science fiction in the Cold War was largely an expression of intelligence agencies' ideas and so forth. It turns out that A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess was in deep touch with MI6.
Yeah.
And so he was actually recounting things that were being done in that time period. So I would say what sci-fi obsolesces is the naivete about the world that we live in. And therefore, it also winds up producing necessarily conspiracy theories because we all know that the way the world is being described to us is false. We don't have any capability to try to connect the dots, but we try anyway. So we wind up with the Kennedy hearings, JFK Jr. hearings yesterday, where he's being accused of conspiracy theories, which is exactly what we should all be doing. We should all be developing conspiracy theories as a result of digital technology. There's no choice.
Mark, that was brilliant. That's the Marshall. They always go, he wasn't political. My lefty political progressive guys go, he wasn't political. I says, dude, he says, why must we continue to mow down the Kennedys? Blah, blah, blah. That quote is amazing to lay on progressive Democrats, especially today. But this is when I ask people, is this book true? And so I would say what it renders obsolete is the word belief or believe, because in the middle of that word is the word lie, L-I-E. In the middle of believe is the word lie. Words evoke more in their meaning. Okay, retrieval, Clinton. What does sci-fi bring back that we previously got rid of?
Strange orders of the cosmos.
Yeah.
So, with the Enlightenment in science, we were ripped from being the center of the universe to being some backwater planet, and Darwin ripped us from being in the shape of God, formed as Adam and Eve, into being, hairless monkeys. Or apes, I should say, but so the order of our universe became disenchanted, and then science fiction retrieves that sort of pre-Enlightenment way of framing our place in the universe back into strange and mythical forms.
Really good, Paul. You're up, but I have to go back to what Mark said for a second. Mark, the Ludovico treatment in Clockwork Orange. I'm forever trying to entertain people's etymologically breaking down Ludovico, because it could be Luddite and Vico, but there's much more to it. And I'm curious, Paul, have you ever tried to break down that word, where Burgess got that word Ludovico?
No, it's an interesting question.
Think about it, Paul, because you are a brainiac, and you can, because it's funny that word appears in Clockwork Orange, and what Mark said is, what do? We clamp our eyes open because we have to look at our cell phone. Not we, but a lot of people have to look at theirs. Like, here's a good example of Ludovico. I've shown films for 40 years in a public theater. When cell phones came in, you would tell people, don't use your cell phone. We're all deciding to look at one screen together, not knowing there's actually two screens. There's a light emitting screen on the right that says exit. So right there was two screens. But I said, we all decided to look at one screen. Go look at your fucking cell phone in the hallway if your dad's dying and you're monitoring it on your cell phone. After a while, you could not tell people to not use their cell phone because they literally had mutated and they can't watch a film without consulting their cell phone during the film. And I saw kids at the Ann Arbor Film Festival checking Facebook in their pocket, literally, because they said, don't use your cell phone. So they would look down and in their pocket. So it is this mutation. But again, now you can't say anything. Okay, Paul, go ahead.
I'll tell you what it would choose, but first I just have to mention that at Neil Postman's funeral, and Neil Postman, a severe critic of technology, including cell phones, a cell phone rings out, and he picks it up and starts talking. I love it. And I'll also say that Robinson Calculator is connected to funerals. My story in Robots Through the Ages. But in terms of what science fiction retrieves, again, a short answer: heavens and hells.
Yeah. Heavens and hells. Very good. Because it is funny, Mark has this great discussion on our interview about the third step of the tetrad. And, I've had these MEA people just come up to me. What is this third step? You can't retrieve. Blah, blah, blah. I was like, get over it, man. It's a question. Just say pass if you can't answer it. Just say fucking zucchini. Say anything. It doesn't matter. But your talk on retrieval is important because it is the step of the tetrad, doing them weekly with people for 40 years. Tetrads on everything we invent is it all boils down to all human inventions retrieve the campfire. This commonality that we have to have some water cooler talk or some sort of thing that brings us together. So anyways, Mark, what does sci-fi retrieve? And you can clarify the problems with retrieval step 2. It's what?
Science fiction is an electric phenomenon.
Yeah.
There have been 5 paradigms in human existence.
Yeah.
Oral, scribal. Then the West detoured into print and electric. The East did not, which is enormously to their advantage right now. Right now in the world, in geopolitical terms, which is a big part of what I do, the East is kicking the West's ass. And the reason for that is because we went through print and electric. But we've all come together now in digital. And digital is retrieving that last commonality we all have. The whole world went from an oral to a scribal condition. And this is what McLuhan is primarily talking about.
Yeah.
And what he's primarily committed to.
Yeah.
And so what science fiction does, what it retrieves, retrieval being the critical quadrant, retrieval being the thing that people introduce.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Mark, you zoomed out there for a second. Repeat the last couple lines.
Retrieval was the 4th element added to a Hegelian triad. And it was a deliberate effort on McLuhan's part. Remember, McLuhan was said when he went to Cambridge, he had 2 choices: Marxism, which is 3, dialectical materialism, or Catholicism, which is 4, the 4 senses of the scripture. So Eric went to University of Dallas. He read in French Henri de Lubac's Medieval Exegesis. The 4th volume has not yet been translated into English, but the first 3 have.
Yeah.
And so he recognized that the 4th element, retrieval, was the key to overcoming Hegel, overcoming the Reformation, overcoming print, overcoming Protestantism, overcoming Lutheranism, and returning to Catholicism. And so, therefore, retrieval is the Catholic quadrant. So when you ask, what does science fiction retrieve, I think others have stated this quite appropriately. Science fiction retrieves what is missing.
Yeah.
We're living in a world, in a secular world, which has collapsed. We're living in a disenchanted, which is a stupid oral version of all this. We were never enchanted. That's the oral world. But we've lost God. And what science fiction retrieves is God.
It's really good, Mark. Okay, I would say what it retrieves is electronic word. That's all kids look at is electronic word, or is it? What is this literacy? They're reading text. I mean, people don't want to talk on the phone anymore. They want text. Weird. Okay, Clinton, go ahead.
So back in the 80s, when microcomputers were rolling out, they were programmable. They came with BASIC, preloaded on the factory, on a ROM chip that their computer would boot into. And then if you had a really expensive computer and you had a disk drive, you would use a disk operating system to load files off a disk. But most of it, like, oh, mom got me a computer for Christmas that cost $300. You're going to sit there and code out of a book directly into the computer. And then if you get good, you can actually write machine code and learn how the CPU works and create, low
Yeah,
level.
that was me. I started with basic, and then I went to microcode. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So that's what I think of when I think of digital or using a computer. And if you're not doing that, or if you don't know you can do that, or if you're prevented from doing that, then you're not using a computer. And the ones and zeros are far removed from your involvement in this virtual cyberspace, high-level GUI stuff that, like, you can't claim to be using a computer. What you're doing is not digital. You're participating in this illusion of lights and sound, of interactive television and virtual objects and high-level apps that are in this economy that's controlled by Apple or controlled by Google or controlled by these online stores who are trying to get you to use their app and get you reliant on stuff. And there, it's
Is that what you're saying, right? In War and Peace,
I'm
Mommy, I grow up, I want to be a computer.
I'm just meaning that when Mark says that science fiction is retrieving what's hidden,
Yeah.
I'll say that we had computers for 10 years and then we hurried up and hid them because they were too scary and hard to sell. And we don't have computers anymore for the most part, unless you're a crazy hacker nerd who goes off the grid and programs all your own stuff or participates in these online ecosystems, right? So we don't have computers. Most people don't have digital. And most people who do have them are trying to sell out to venture capitalists to make a fast buck, and then cry about it and be like, "Oh, I didn't know I was, ruining my child's attention span." So we don't have computers anymore. Most people don't. All the people I meet on the street, all my friends, the computers have them.
Yeah, Clint, that was good. It's really funny, Mark, that I've done these tetrads for 40 years with people, and I guess I should have put the retrieval as the fourth step, but we always put reverse for the fourth. So now, Clinton, you're up. If you take a sci-fi, you press it to an extreme, what might it flip into?
It's two really divergent pathways. One is pure escapist fantasy, and then the other one is actual reality. So when Arthur C. Clarke is, predicting how it is that future satellites will air brake and bounce off the atmosphere of distant planets so as to land, and he's coming up with, he's inventing strategies that NASA will use in a decade or two. That's science fiction pushed into reality because he's applying science, physical science, and he's creating the future, literally.
Yeah.
Or when science fiction as an art form, when reality is an art form and science fiction becomes the flavor of that art form, then everyone's worried about made-up problems that are based purely on fantasy and delusions that are totally out of touch with what science is. It's not science anymore. Now it's pure fantasy.
Yeah, here's the striker sign. Leave AI to sci-fi. Strike on, brother. Okay, Paul, you flip sci-fi to an extreme. What might it flip into?
Well, first of all, I like that sign. Good. I'm with the strikers. Well, listen, I'm liking, and now it's upside down. Very good.
That's the flip. That's the flip. The flipping. Okay, yeah. Push to an extreme. Go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
There are all kinds of words I could use, but I don't know. I guess this reflects, more my current mood about life in general, science fiction in particular. If and when science fiction reverses into something, that something will be numbness.
Whoa, what a word. That's McLuhan.
Is that opposite?
Very good. We don't need no two-second words, Paul. Numbness. That's narcissism as narcosis, man. That is an amazing document that Marshall wrote. Okay, they're good. Mark, you're up. Flip it to an extreme.
Well, it turns out that flip was originally called reverse. And so it's the only one of the four quadrants that had to be renamed. And it's also the quadrant that most people, to the extent they bother with the tetrad, because as we all know, McLuhan scholars avoid the tetrad because that's Eric's work, not Marshall's work or something or other. It turns out Paul knows better than that. It was really Marshall's work, and Paul's the one who hosted the first conference on the whole topic with Marshall, and Eric was, as so often, carrying the bags in that situation.
I'm sure Barrington Nevitt must have had something to do with this, but pardon my interruption.
Well, it
who
turned
had?
out,
Wait, Clinton, who did you said had something to do with?
Nevitt.
Oh, Barry Nevitt. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
well, Barry is a MI6 agent who was assigned by British intelligence to check out Marshall. By the way, that was Marshall's view of what Barry's job was. He was a communications expert for British intelligence and Canadian intelligence, was assigned to Marshall to sort out what was going on. And I never met Marshall, but I did meet Barry. And I know something about, and that fits. Barry was an British intelligence agent, Canadian, assigned to Marshall McLuhan. And so no doubt he had a role in all of this. But as it turns out that I prefer reverse to flip. I prefer the original
Yeah, no,
name.
that's fine. Yeah, use reverse. Yeah.
And it turns out that reverse is actually an expression of something called the S curve. It turns out there is nothing exponential in physical reality. It turns out that all growth is what's called second order growth, and second order growth has a formula which includes its limits. So everything goes through a kind of a S curve or logistics curve.
Like that?
Well, that's some sort of a twisted Moebius sort of an exercise, but maybe.
Well, that's the cover of
Probably a
Global
few S
Village.
curves built
Well,
into
that's
that.
the cover. But it's funny, Mark, because that's the cover of Global Village.
Yeah.
And I always said it's 2 Mobius strips, and my friend said, no, it isn't. It's 1 Mobius strip.
Okay.
But we think of 1 Mobius strip as half of that. But I really got to divert. Is this guy Bruce Powers, CIA also?
Very possibly. The
Very
world
possibly.
that Marshall
That's all I
lived in,
want
the
to know.
avant-garde world that Marshall lived in that time period. And in fact, there's a version of this going on now. I won't bore you with all the contacts that I get from Swedish intelligence, British intelligence, Israeli intelligence, Japanese intelligence. It turns out that the intelligence agencies of the world today, out of personal experience,
things every day,
have actually organized fringe watching exercises.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all probably somewhere on their list as fringe type people. I mean, get contacted and so forth. Yeah. John Perry Barlow gets invited to the NSA. That's silly. I knew John quite well, and I know the NSA tangentially. But that sort of stuff goes on to a great, great degree. So it turns out that reversing is this mathematical reversal. There's a limit. There's always a limit to anything. Nothing in reality is exponential. So when I confronted Ray Kurzweil, who's a mathematician, on just that topic, he said, well, no. And I said, Ray, come on. You know about logistics. You know about the S curve. You know about the second order growth. Yes, I know. So I said, good. So nothing is exponential. He said, well, if you concatenate, if you put one S curve and then another S curve, which is the way it's described today, the way those people describe these things is one S curve after another. I said, no, Ray, you'll wind up with another big ass S curve. You take those mathematical equations. He said, yes, I know. I'm a mathematician. Thank you very much. But I have an audience. My audience expects me to talk about something which never existed, exponential growth. Yeah. And so therefore, I have no choice. I'm trapped. He told me this after a George Gilder conference. I met with him in Westchester. And he said this, I'm trapped by my audience. I said, well, that makes a whole lot of sense. The audience is the formal cause of any work of art. So your work of art is trapped by your audience. But reversal is absolutely crucial. And it's not, and here again, we're dealing with Marshall McLuhan, the Catholic, at Cambridge in 1935 versus the Marxists who then became the spies on behalf of the Soviet Union, right? The people that Marshall was there with contemporaneously became the Cambridge Five or whatever the name is for these people who wound up spying them for the Soviet Union. So Marshall was rubbing shoulders with these Soviet spies. It turns out that everything that goes up must come down. It turns out that everything that you think is good and interesting gets replaced. And that then leads to a whole larger topic, which we won't be able to talk about today at great length, paradigm shifts. We're now in a fundamentally different S-curve. The terrain has changed. We're no longer playing electric games. We're not doing the old science fiction. And I recognize that Paul is deeply involved with this, and I learn a lot from what Paul has to say on these topics, but we're not doing electric anymore. We're doing digital. And digital is a fundamentally different phenomenon, replacing human beings with robots, therefore requiring human beings to ask, what does it mean to be human? Therefore asking human beings to rediscover things that they have otherwise forgotten, and memory is the answer. So what it flips into, the reversal of all this is becoming human. Once again, big challenge.
Yeah, that's back to Theodore Sturgis, more than human. I'd say it flips into used bookstores where they sell a lot of Philip K. Dick books. And Mark, you evoked a lot there. Brother, can you paradigm? And you know what NSA stands for? Never say anything. Okay, let's knock this out of the park, gentlemen, and wrap it up. We'll do a quick tetrad on AI. Okay, and that's because I flip or reverse AI into McLuhan's integral awareness. And there's so many things you can do. Alien invasion, AI. Artificial ignorance, AI. Auditory imagination, T.S. Eliot, AI. So, Clinton, you're up. What does AI enhance?
Pass.
That's good. Passing is an answer. In fact, your first a grunt was great. That is an amazing answer in tetrads. We don't need no stinking words. Paul, you're up. What does AI enhance?
An attempt at intelligence that's the equivalent of human intelligence, but is situated in some kind of mechanical, digital, non-biological device.
Yeah. Mark, you're up. Keep it to 3 to 5 words, please.
It turns out that AI enhances print. It turns out that AI enhances reductionism. It turns out that AI enhances everything that's wrong about the world in which we live.
Woo! I love that. Everything, everywhere, all at once is wrong. Beautiful. Okay, Clinton, now back to you. You want to type in anything there? What does AI enhance?
Yeah, what we've seen so far is normalization. As we've discovered new status quos we didn't know existed because these status sets are trained on the most likely probable line of text that most people on Reddit would say. So, okay, there you go. It enhanced the Reddit hive mind. Let's go with that instead.
Reddit hive mind. All right. And I would say there's a lot it enhances. It's Buster Keaton's turning a stumble into a dance, or as one of our people said the other day, this term I loved, he called objective reality. I was like, what's objective reality? You know what it is? It's the New York Times saying Hofstadter, the Gödel, Escher, Bach guy, and he wrote a book called Strange Loop. he flipped. Like a couple years ago, he loved AI, and now he's like, it's the worst thing in the world. Help! I'm dying. Clinton, what does AI render obsolete or displace?
Well, computer programming.
Yes.
Possibly.
That's right.
Okay, Paul.
AI obsolesces intelligence wedded to some kind of organic matrix.
Yeah.
Protein, flesh and blood, whatever.
Yeah, what's another word for matrix there? What do you mean by the word matrix?
Some kind of organic foundation.
Foundation, yeah. Because, you know, I'm always confused because at a BLM movement, that could be Bureau of Land Management or Bureau, you know, Black Lives Matter. It's confusing. I saw a T-shirt and it said, "The Matrix was a documentary." I love T-shirts. It's like the bumper sticker down my street. It says, "Don't ever believe everything you think." And I'm like, wait, don't ever believe everything you feel. Who knows? Okay, Mark, I'm not obsolescence. AI.
It's very straightforward. AI obsolescence Gnosticism.
Yeah.
The notion that human beings are made in the image and likeness of God.
Yeah.
Translating into what became the watchword of the Whole Earth Catalog. We are as like gods.
Woo!
Which is now totally obsolete. AI has convinced us that Stuart Brand had his head up his ass.
Have you read this new Stuart Brand book?
No,
Well, the recent biography of Stuart Brand was written by a good friend of mine, John
Have
Markoff.
you read it? Yeah, have you read it?
I've talked with John at great length about it, and we've agreed that Stuart Brand is a flaming asshole.
Ooh.
And in fact, he's hurt
Whoa.
everybody who he ever worked with. He demanded other people to do everything
Okay, Mark,
that he's
we
gotten
don't
credit
want-
for.
We don't want to do name calling. I just had, but hook me up. I want to interview that guy. Stuart Brand, you know, and what you evoked there, we are as like God, narcissism, very, very good input on the tetrad.
Gnosticism.
Is Frank, yeah, what was it again? Clinton?
Gnosticism.
Narcissism, not
Not
narcissism.
narcissism, it is Gnosticism, a theological term.
Gnosticism. What's
Gnostic-
another word for Gnosticism?
Gnosticism is basically human beings feeling that they're godlike.
Yeah, okay.
They're transcending humanity, and it has many expressions.
Surely
same root as agnostic.
Yeah,
there's a
Egg-
Gnostic,
eggnog.
Well,
Eggnog.
no,
I
the
drink it
Gnos
every-
here is knowledge, and agnos is obviously not knowing, and
Yeah.
Gnosticism is knowing. The
Yeah.
root here is you know in a godlike sort of fashion, theologically, and so what AI has obsolesced is Gnosticism.
just to
Go
play
ahead.
devil's
Yeah.
advocate there, Mark. Most people would say by creating AIs, we're even more godlike, because here we are creating life itself. You know?
Except it fails in every possible way. We've all become aware that AI is a giant fraud. None of it actually works. And as a result of it not working, Gnosticism is now obsolete.
Don't overestimate the gullibility of people to be impressed by functioning technology, Mark.
I love you all. I will never underestimate gullibility of most people, but not us.
Yeah, that's two Zappa lines. I love the cops that they beat the shit out of me on the street. This is Manipian satire at its best. And then in regards to Mark's answer, he said in the song Dumb All Over, he said, if we're dumb, then God is dumb, because we're made in his likeness, and maybe a little ugly on the side. So if we're ugly, then God's ugly. So anyways, we're on to retrieval.
Frank was very big on the word ugly. I think that's important to remember.
I have a lecture on ugliness. We could do a salon on it. Okay, retrieval, reversal, and we're out of here, gentlemen. This has been truly enlightening for me and fun. Fun's a key word. Okay, Clinton, you flip. No, what does AI retrieve? What does it bring back that we got rid of?
I worry that with people's lack of ability to know how to fortify the security and integrity of their long distance electronic communications. Okay, you can't hack a telegraph, I guess. I guess you can, but if you're talking back and forth, it's really hard to change stuff. 15, you know,
Yeah,
like decades ago. But we're retrieving a dark planet where we don't know what's happening beyond our front door. If
yeah.
we stop trusting our screens to show us what's really going on. And if we all fear that the CIA or the British intelligence or the Chinese or whoever else we want to blame is hacking our television screen and not showing us what's happening 100 yards down the street or the next city down the road, let alone in other countries. If we're worried that our grandmother may have actually died, 2 years ago, and all the video chats we've had with her are being paid for by people who are saving our mental health from going through the grief of her passing. If people are hanging up on their grandchildren because the last time their grandson called, it was a scammer emulating his voice, saying, "Oh my God, Grandma, I need money right now." People
That's
very
it.
quickly not trust their communications media at all. And when we do that, we retrieve the world before the telegraph, where we don't actually know what was happening outside our immediate physical vicinity.
Brilliant, Clinton. I've fallen down and I can't reach my AI voice. Okay, Paul, you're up. What does AI retrieve?
Extraterrestrial intelligence.
Nice. Okay,
The
Mark.
Earth Coincidence Control Office that so much occupied the imagination of John Lilly as he injected himself multiple times with ketamine in a floating bath.
Oh, yeah.
Echo. It retrieves echo.
Echo. Did you meet Lilly ever?
No, but I knew many people who did meet him, and it was a very sad story. He became addicted to ketamine.
Yep. Okay, and I would say it's wallowing in our own ignorance, sort of what Clinton says, but indeed, how do we flip that wallowing in our own ignorance into a breakthrough, So that is now, again, the flip word I will avoid for you, Mark. What does AI reverse into when pressed to an extreme?
We're dealing with retrieval. We're not in reversal. We're in retrieval. You've
no,
asked me what does AI retrieve?
No, you did it. You said echo.
No, it turns out that's what I was suggesting Clinton had just said.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I thought you were done.
My answer to the question of what AI retrieves is humanity.
Okay.
Very distinctly.
Yeah.
This has never happened before in the history of the human race. They've been challenged to remember, what does it mean to be human? Artificial intelligence forces humanity to remember what it means to be human. So the retrieval is humanity as a result of AI. I am not negative about AI. I am not suggesting that we should stop it. I'm actually suggesting we should do more of it because it will make the human beings more and more compelled to sort out what it means to be human, which we've forgotten ever since print. As it turns out, the Chinese have an enormous advantage in remembering what it means to be human. And as a result of that, which is characterized in various ways, retrieval of their classics and I Ching and all the rest of this, I've been deeply involved for 20 years in these questions with Chinese civilization because of my association with the Pentagon, the Office of Net Assessment, Andy Marshall's shift from Russia to China. So I've been embedded in all of this. And it turns out that the Chinese have figured out what it means to be human as a Chinese, and the West has still forgotten what it means to be human. AI forces us to recall.
Yeah, it's good. Good answer, Mark. I appreciate that because that's what we've shared a lot of deep humanity here in our dialogue today. So here's the last step in Clinton, you're up. Not the last, one of the steps, one of the quadrants. What does AI flip into when pressed to an extreme? What could it flip into when pressed to an extreme?
What it is, which is just really fast computers. And
Fast computers.
Yeah. Like it could become what it actually is, but what no one treats it as.
Yeah. There's the New York Times. Can AI be an inventor? Okay, Paul, you're up.
I was going to say, when I read
Clinton wasn't done. Let Clinton.
Oh, no, pardon my interruption. Only, math. We've done it on abacus and chalkboards and punch cards for centuries. As long as we've had fingers, we've been doing math. Can the fingers that are doing the counting, absent the human mind, invent anything? Again, it's just math very quickly.
Yeah.
That's all it is. That's all it is. It's the mechanization of, right? It's an abstraction from a mechanical process of material doing its regular physical material thing. But material.
And the one thing you said is important. When you look at Kubrick saying in Playboy magazine, I made 2001 to convolute McLuhan, that's an immense thing to say in regards to AI because of Hal. And Hal gives people this illusion that these things could have emotion.
Do we know whether McLuhan ever actually watched Hal? The story that I have is that he fell asleep when the Wagner thing was played.
No, the only movie that McLuhan ever watched was Annie Hall.
Really?
Well,
I think someone told me that McLuhan, I think Eric told me that the story that Marshall fell asleep after 10 minutes of a private screening of 2001. Well, then he woke back up and he saw the rest of the film. I think one of the daughters was with Marshall. Do you know, Paul?
Well, I don't know that, but I do know that Pauline Kael, the notorious film critic here in New York, she regularly would fall deeply asleep in a movie theater and then write a detailed review in which she explained why it was so terrible. When she was called on it, she said, well, that's why I fell asleep.
Well, that goes so deep. That's Harry Smith saying the purpose of cinema is to put you to sleep. And it's back to it is cinema as we are sleeping collectively. And it's a known fact, a lot of film critics, but it's back to Clinton does his research so deep. Turning me on to Parker Tyler's influence on Marshall is really deep. Pre-Mechanical Bride, which we started with, Marshall wrote a book, and it was before Mechanical Bride and was influenced heavily by Parker. And Parker is in that realm of Pauline Kael and Murray, what's his name? Anyways, these people who actually are great writers and they just happen to write about film. It doesn't matter if they, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, Paul, you're up. What could AI reverse into?
Robots through the ages. And in particular, the audio version of that book, which has Leonard Nimoy doing a narration, a reading of Avram Davidson's story, The Golem.
Yeah. So and that's you're saying Robots Through the Ages is the name of the book we're promoting today.
Yes, it is the name of the book we're promoting today, but it is also what AI will reverse into, because AI just in a machine is not the final location of AI. It won't be fully realized until it's inside robots.
Yeah.
And
how's that for promoting our product? Do you have a copy you can show up to the camera? Don't worry about it. They can get it. Okay, Mark, you're up. Reverse.
It turns out that my godfather was Norbert Wiener. Norbert Wiener's last published work was called God and Gold, Inc.
Incorporated.
That was a result of the Terry lectures that he delivered at Yale after roughly a decade of having nothing to say because he was eliminated by the House Un-American Activities Committee, as I've written about in one of my essays on this. So the answer to the question here, and I think here Paul is exactly correct. what it reverses into is the golem. And
Yeah.
that raises a very important question, which I've been unable to answer, and maybe Paul can help me with this. What are the Jews going to do about AI? It turns out that in every one of these technological transitions, you can just simply write a series up. So what do the Jews do about print? What do the Jews do about Scribble? What do the Jews do about electricity? So I'm very interested. I'm Catholic. My children are Jewish, but and Lance Strait, once upon a time, and various other people attacked me. I was kicked off of MEA because it was anti-Semitic. Lance is absolutely crazy Semite that thinks that he's on a quest from God. Paul knows more about all of this from Lance than others do. But the question I have is, what are the Jews going to do about the golem now that we really have one? And I must say, unfortunately, I have a 6 p.m. call that I am the head of, so I must leave now. I want to thank you all very much. Gerry, you're great. Paul, you're great. Clinton, you're fantastic. I really enjoy the fact that we spent this 2 hours together, and I hope we get to do it again. Thank you.
We will. Thanks for being here, Mark. And now you can hear Paul's answer later because we'll keep the rolling. Paul, go ahead and answer Mark's question.
Mark's question is, what do I think the Jews will do about AI?
Yeah.
I'm not going to answer that question. Just
Okay.
because I'm Jewish, I don't have any knowledge of what Jewish people in general will do. I have knowledge about what I might do. That's my best answer.
That's good. No, that's good. And so here's what I would say. My answer is in Marshall's book, War and Peace in the Global Village. And it is a quote from Finnegan's Wake, where flash becomes word and silence self-loud. So that's page 267 of the Wake. You know, what a book that Marshall would put a bunch of pictures and quotes from Finnegan's Wake and end with that great picture at the end. But this was really enlightening, and I appreciate your time and energy. And I'll end with this joke. Yes, it's super fun. And I'll end with this joke that Marshall always said that I'm fond of. The priest was crossing the Canadian border, and the custom officer says, "Hey, what do you have in that flask?" And the priest says, "It's water." And the custom officer says, "Let me." And he takes a swig of it and he goes, "That's whiskey." And the priest goes, "It's a miracle." So it is, Marshall said, communication of the new is a miracle, but it's not impossible. And I think we covered a lot of new communication today. If either of you have any closing thoughts or comments, I welcome them. But go ahead, Paul.
I'll just say, that we've discussed an enormous number of things today, but even though Marshall McLuhan, as far as I know, never wrote any science fiction, I did want to make the point that to read his books, I at least felt something similar to what I felt when I read Isaac Asimov's books, and Robert Heinlein's novels, and so on. And I meant that Isaac Asimov's novels. Yeah. And I think that's because McLuhan was such a creative thinker that the distinction between fiction and nonfiction is not completely relevant when you're talking about Marshall McLuhan's writings.
Yeah. It's full circle, Paul, so well. My friend is a successful playwright, novelist, everything, and he wanted to come to our McLuhan meeting many years ago. He says, what should I read? I goes, just read anything. And he came to the meeting. He goes, this guy's a poet. He just said, he didn't go, he's a media theorist. And, you go to this, he's saying this in the 50s to his mom. My first book is a new form of science fiction, a new kind of novel. So, Clinton, any closing comments or thoughts?
Several hours worth, of course. Don't have that. This idea of AI becoming humanity or flipping into robots, as you put it, Paul. I mean, we were talking about embodiment earlier, and Mark was talking about the importance of the soul. And I read Norbert Wiener's God and Golem Incorporated in the Fisher Rare Book Library in Toronto. It was McLuhan's copy. So I was reading it along with McLuhan's footnotes all along, and I made that a part of my paper that I published in New Explorations. But the point of all this is be that people really like to push people don't like bearing the responsibility of owning their acts of free will, and we all too easily give up control to larger systems, and those systems can be ideologies. It can be the companies who were playing around with spreadsheets in the early 80s and making market forecasts and then tanking it and saying, oh, the computer told us to do it. It's like, well, who put the numbers in the spreadsheet, Bob? You did, right?
Yeah.
We've been trying to throw agency. What Wiener says is it's as simple as sailors on a life raft drawing straws to see who has to get forced overboard, or flipping a coin, right? Any system that you can foist your decision making onto so that you can blame it or scapegoat it is denying, the responsibility and the fullness of your humanity. So people become robots when they let their media do their thinking for them, or when they let abstract systems or ideologies do their thinking for them, when they let the authorities that they get from TV, decide their own viewpoints. And so the humanity that we retrieve against AI is going to be when we continue to allow ourselves the means to question our AIs, the same way we've always questioned systems which have threatened to take away our choice and our free will. And that means taking on responsibility and bearing the burden for our choices, even if that ends up, meaning we own our mistakes, which is a painful thing that lots of people have a hard time doing, right? So it's a real trial by fire for the human soul to try and take back responsibility for all the inconveniences and discomforts that allows. But that's what I think Mark is saying is going to be retrieved when we retrieve what's human.
It's beautiful, well put, Clinton, because it's back to Zappa's great line. I'm a failure, but I'm not a miserable failure. We can have fun, with this, turning this stumbling into a dance. Marshall's great card: ship to deep sea diver, surface at once, ship is sinking. That is so deep. And I do recommend people listen to your interview with Paul on New Explorations. It really is beautiful how you go into the Amish, Paul, because this is proof that, I always say I have a bias. Cars ruin the world. Cars and TV ruin the world. And the Amish still use horse and buggy, and they're efficient, But the Amish have this thing where they're almost hoiking up, back to Marcel Duchamp, poor tools require better skills. That's an amazing little flip. It's sort of like what I started with, that there's no solutions because there's no problems. But here is IA, which is Marshall's integral awareness, can be reversed into AI in passing through the vanishing point, where seeing oneself both as oneself and the other.
Mm.
So, gentlemen, I appreciate your time and energy. Thank you so much. We'll definitely do this again. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, but I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Thanks.